Hello, I'm Timo Peach. I'm a music maker and a creative with a big interest in how the human planet fits together. I'm exploring the world around me partly through some musical storytelling of my own, making some slightly left-field electro-pop and scoring for film and theatre, but also by talking to other artists, makers and thinkers about how they are trying to make sense of the now of fearsome unrealities. For Science Cake Festival 2020, I thought I'd explore a little thesis based on my own research project, Unsee the Future. Why science is a bit like art. Is it? Why would I think that? Well, central to my own view of the world at the moment is the idea that there's nothing we should be investing in more, you could say, than art in times of crisis, to help us make sense of complexity, conflict and deep concerns, to help us picture, write into and bring to life new stories of us. But science might have a role to play there, no? It doesn't just roll back the frontiers of our understanding of reality around us, it also helps build alternative futures. So could these two types of human instinct and work share more than a little DNA? I've built my little thesis upon 3 linked hypotheses, and in this Science Cake Talk I will be talking to a scientist and an artist to see how my thinking stacks up against their respective experiences. I'll be talking with Brian Kraemer Banks, an award-winning educator who's got 25 years of teaching science under his belt. He's an infectious, enthusiastic, creative and activist around his work and speaks with great passion and insight. I also talk to Denise Poote, a fine art practitioner and lecturer, whose approach to her work is exploratory and quite methodical. She has an almost data-driven analysis approach to her mark making and her sculpture and her exploration of movement within spaces. What do they both think of where science and art meet? So welcome to the 2020 Momo Science Caketalk. Science and art. Back in the halcyon days of history, when most people knew their place and didn't pretend to know much else, but got on instead with the business of looking quite boring, somebody had the wonderful idea of the Renaissance genius. That person was Leonardo da Vinci. And he had the idea by being born a genius and by spending his entire life really getting into it. At about the time, various Europeans were setting up some of the early showstoppers of the Renaissance. He also did this by being so well remembered, he became convenient historic shorthand for massive creative themes sweeping across centuries in the minds of lazy modern writers writing videos for webinars. But Signor Davi's biggest convenience to this particular talk is a key idea that his entire output while alive seems to have embodied. Dead clever people don't stay in their lane. They don't even see lanes. Leo is perhaps most often described as an artist, but I think it'd be rather less lane disciplined and more intriguing to describe him more simply as an inquiring mind. An inquiring mind. In particular, back in those days before we'd really started breaking down study of the world around us into geology, biology, PE and double physics, it looks like Da Vinci really didn't see a distinction between art and science. Today, we do. To such an extent that parents have been telling their children for years that one would be a great career and the other isn't even a proper job. As a daft creative myself, I've always found the idea of scientific progress an inspiration and a comfort, especially when it comes to making sense of where we're going and what kind of world we want to live in. After exploring the shape of the human planet around me with Unsee the Future, I think it's interesting to consider 3 key ways that the practice of science is a bit like the practice of art. For starters, the artist and the scientist are all but Jungian archetypes in our minds, and both have been as venerated and mistrusted as magicians and despots in modernist times. But in a time when certainties seem to be failing us, could we make new sense of the world around us by considering the shared practices of what art and science even are, especially if what we're all instinctively exploring is truth? Why science is a bit like art. Hypothesis 1. The sketchbook. The interesting bit isn't really the bit at the end that you put on a wall / in a paper. It's the hair-pulling scribbles and raging at the universe and making and failing and making again and popping the kettle on for the 15th time and writing your way into it and staring at the sky and idle scrapbooking and scribbling some more and following the looping pencil line, where understanding is found. Brian Banks, thank you for joining me today on my Science Caketalk. The sketchbook. It's a definite artifact and method in art. But how would you describe the kind of the journey of scientific method as opposed to the outputs when you get to do press releases or discoveries or moments in time you get your name put against?
Well, I think it's very, very similar. There's a lot of similarities in terms of process, in that you've got a little exploratory phase, and it's fair enough. You might have a moment of clarity where you think, well, I'm going to go and look at this because I think this is the way it's going to work. But ultimately, you have to do some exploratory stuff. You're trying to figure out whether there's any mileage in the idea that you've got, whether it's going to work at all. You have to do, obviously, in strict science disciplines, you do your reading time. So you're looking to see that, has anyone else already done this? And is it worth my while looking further into it? Is there any area here that I can add to the knowledge from? So that's similar to art, in that you've got an idea and you're evidently going to be thinking, has someone else done it?
Yeah.
You know, if you woke up one morning after a sort of red wine fueled evening and thought, you know what, I'm going to take copies of myself and put them on a beach, and then you did a Google and you find that Anthony Gormley's done that, then you're probably going to think, well, yeah, maybe not. But I think the thing where science diverges a little bit in the popular perception, and I think it's popular perception because it's not actually true. Science diverges a little bit in that people then think, once you've decided upon a pathway, that it's all very procedural. The scientific method is procedural. I'm going to do this, I'm going to record this data, I'm going to check it against this data, and I'm going to then go back and move forward, and it's all terribly procedural. But this has been couched in science as like a bomb-proof way of doing something, the scientific method. But I would argue that the scientific method is basically the creative method, just named differently. You try something, you see what works, you see what doesn't, you try something else. So take, for example, writing. So you're writing something, you're trying to craft a poem or a piece of extended writing, which has a purpose. You want to try and create an impact on the person who's reading it. So you will learn that craft. You will try that. You will have test readings almost. You will see, what do you get from that? You'll look at what critics say. Is that what I meant to get? And then you will respond to that and craft what you're going to do as the next step. It is essentially the same circular pathway that science does. So maybe progress is more like a spiral than a linear thing. But science likes to pretend it's linear.
Why do you think that is? Because why do you think that is? Why does science like to pretend that it's linear when, life is a spiral? The way the Earth moves through the universe, the way everything moves is basically some sort of spiral, isn't it? So why does it want to be more engineered seeming?
Well, I would argue, and this is contentious, it's purely my own opinion, I would argue that science is a bedfellow with consumerism and capitalism. It is dependent on money. Money is the lifeblood that allows science to take place. Um, and therefore, the money system is linear.
Yeah.
I am here, and I want to be there where there's more money. And to get there, I do this. There's a little documentary about some of these crazy guys who work in CERN, and they are particle physicists. So they're living in a world which is just bizarre.
And are they crazy? Do they have crazy parties in the Collider?
Well, they talk about all. I think there's an inference that there may be some substances used to help them understand the wider implications of the universe. So they had a big conference where lots of press were there, and they were talking about the Higgs and the movement towards finding the Higgs and how that might unlock other aspects of what was going on at the very early stages in the universe in the fractions of a second. And one chap from, wasn't The Economist magazine, but it was an economic paper, asked them simply, what's the financial value in this? What's the value in what you're doing? And the guys, to be fair, they were boggled. They sort of looked astonished and said, we're trying to find out the origin of everything. And the interviewer was like, well, what's that worth? and I think science has that uneasy relationship where a scientist at heart is a child who wants to find out how things work. They start taking the back off radios when they're 5, and they're taking the back off the universe when they're 25. But the money side of life wants to know, how can I monetize it? How can I make a profit from it?
Yeah.
You know, how will I know your targets have been achieved?
Yeah.
And I think that's why science is often couched in the language of accountancy, because science, like so many things in the world, is run by accountants.
Yeah, yes. And it wants to be dependable and engineered and predictable and all those things. But I wonder about you as a science educator, how much you encourage those in your classrooms to show their working out, or how you want them to sort of show their sketchbook of thinking. Does that become a precious artifact in itself, or is it all about the discovery?
Oh, it's about the process. I think the process is more important than the discovery. The process is to steal an idea from Terry Pratchett's novels of the skeleton key. The process is the skeleton key, which you can use to unlock everything. The single discovery is unlocking a single door. Well done, you've got through that door. Wonderful, lovely job. And that door might cure polio, or that door might help you understand a little bit more about how a worm interrelates with the sand particles it crawls through. So that's fine. That's the bread and butter of science. But it's the process that allows this flexibility of thought.
Denise Poote, what has been your experience of the sketchbook? Where does that figure in your practice as an artist, the journey towards something finished?
I do use a sketchbook, and I do problem solve using sketchbooks. I have actually got a different sort of sketchbook. So I guess I use sketchbooks in different ways. It depends what you call a sketchbook. If you've got an idea that it's a folded object of, probably paper, then I think I use it in a much broader sense than that.
Well, that's the thing here, really, isn't it? That for somebody who's a visual artist with physical media, you might picture an exact sketchbook carrying it around. At art school, I always found that a chore to try and fill the sketchbook and look like I'd been working. But for somebody in that medium, it's a natural thing to note down. But the sketchbook's more a state of mind. Sketchbook's a state of mind, man.
Nice one. Yeah. I agree.
So you're saying for you, it's not necessarily a bound book or folded paper. It's just the methodology. But how do you record that methodology? Do you bother to, or is it just a working in naturally?
I think I have scraps of paper on the wall. If it's got to be kept, I've got lots of gatherings of odd bits of paper. Really, maybe it's digital, maybe it's a spreadsheet, even something as
Interesting.
Methodical.
Yes.
As that really. And tangible. Sometimes it's a very important little corner of a shopping list.
Yes. The napkin I'm always talking about. What's the first thing you write down? And you grab a bit of paper And yes, and it could be anything. But do you cherish those corners of napkins? Do you then do you archive that stuff, or does it not matter to you after you've got to an end point of some kind?
I know that it probably will never be looked at again, but if I've got a place that I can compartmentalize it to, then I'll put it in that folder. I won't. Yeah. So if I'm doing a project, I'll probably keep every single bit of paper that's been daubed on or collected, or materials, kind of contacts or research points, lists of things to do. I'll probably keep them all until the shelf falls out under the weight of it all.
Yeah, archiving is a practical problem, isn't it, when you're making physical stuff? And well, actually, digital as well, about how you retrieve things. But there is that instinct to collect it up. And for you as an artist, where's the balance of importance for you? The journey through that literal or metaphoric sketchbook, or the arrival points at certain bits of work?
I think the journey is really important to me. So a lot of the things I'm doing at the moment are questioning the value of the artifacts. I was talking to an artist yesterday, a friend of ours, Rosie, and we were talking about when you make a production line of stuff, really, what do you do with it afterwards? And at the moment, it's always been a question for me, really, I think. But at the moment, I'm trying to explore ways of working that maybe things do precipitate out, and their objects or their drawings or their things, but actually all the work is taking place in the questions around how the process unravels and develops. Really.
Yeah.
So, yeah, that's where the rigor is for me at the moment, is in how I'm making the work happen.
Does that mean, though, that you'd want to exhibit that journey as well, kind of share the workings out, if you were ever doing an expo of what you're working on?
So some of the things that are going through my mind at the moment is, how do I evidence what, all the kind of things that have been happening, all the moving around the space, and the things that do get made along that, and how do you choose to present the story? Then it becomes about what story it is that you're curating and choosing to present. So I guess all the things that I've been gathering and documenting, so my sketchbook also includes digital video, pieces of sound, photography, as well as prints and drawings, really. And there can then be something that precipitates out of all of that, that's a brand new thing, and that may be what I'll present. Or it could be that I reconfigure what I've got to make it a form for a specific context, really. And the context could be the space or the audience or the material that's available. Or,
I mean, in that sense, any finished piece that you do out of that whole process is a sort of mixture of a record and an event. I'm always telling creators, finish things, because then you get to learn from the closure. But you also, throw a party. If you've done an LP, throw a party, because the event will stick in your mind, and that's important. And we tend to think of works of art as captured moments and the thing to analyse. But actually, for the artist, they can be much more like a memory jogger, an event of an achievement for the real work, which was how they got there.
Yeah, I agree. There's something about that the thing that gets shown is only ever a snapshot of where you are in the process.
It's a snapshot, yeah.
Time. Yeah, and the questions continue. That's why people carry on making work, I think, or I carry on making work, because it precipitates a whole new set of problems to be addressed in some form, problems. Yeah.
But yeah, you're happy for people to see you working out, are you? You don't mind people snooping?
I enjoy the magic that is associated with artists whose work I love. The magician kind of quality of it, really. I guess I'm more interested, rather than showing my workings out, I'd rather work with people while I'm doing my workings out, so that they're sharing the kind of the actual generation of the process.
The unfolding of it.
Yeah, yeah.
Why science is a bit like art. Hypothesis 2. The crit. The true bit isn't mostly found in moments of inspiration, propelling you out of the bath and into the street naked, so cementing your reputation as a boundaryless mad genius. It's the boot camp of hanging your damn fool half-baked naked work on the wall in front of your tyrannical peers that really kicks the shite out of your ideas. That and the realisation you've got to get over yourself and pick a genius team if you're to stand half a chance. So, the tyranny of the crit in art college is a kind of boot camp. Is that how peer review works for the scientist?
I think certainly I've colleagues who are professional scientists who publish a lot, they're definitely very concerned about it. I think there's a lot of internals as well, where there's personality, which is similar to art. I know that in the artistic world, you can have a personality conflict which will follow you for the rest of your life. They'll just always bitch about what you're doing. And in science, you get these little niggles as well. And we're all meant to be terribly dispassionate and stuff.
Yeah, no, I hear you're supposed to be, yeah.
Yeah, we're supposed to be, but we're not. I remember when I was at university with a lecturer who was very unkindly known as Robo-Prof. He had lost a hand in an accident. Another lecturer, a more junior lecturer in that department, had pinched some research from him, which he then presented during a session. And I recall it was quite famous that Robo-Prof stood up at some point with his hook waving and said, "I don't bloody believe it," and stormed out. And that was the end of lots of elements of that chap's career, because it all became very personal.
And that was the end of lots of elements of that chap's career. You tell it well.
Yes, it was not least because the chap also released a pile of locusts, which apparently still live in the building. But the idea of criticism in science is meant to be a positive force of good, and I think there are areas where it is getting better, but not more in applied sciences. I think the way criticism works in things like air safety and critical safety areas, that's particularly good, where there's a no blame approach and everyone can learn and move forward. And
well, it's right down to cross-checking on every flight, isn't it?
Yeah, and then we've got in medicine, it's moving towards that, where it's much better to have a complete, honest, open critique of things that didn't work, so that we can all become better. And that's sort of personality neutral. It's very grown up and stuff. But in science itself, while it's meant to be, and it needs to be quite dispassionate in order for people to get things published which are important, and for things which are dodgy not to be published. In order for that, the criticism needs to be, it needs to happen, it needs to be an important part of the process. But by God, I imagine it hurts. You know, you're talking about people who've perhaps spent 3, 4, 5 years, maybe 10 years of their life looking at something, only to have it, only for someone, almost inevitably some young buck, to come and say, well, your theory was good, but not quite. But then look, it's happened to the best of them. Einstein's had things overturned that weren't true and things proven that were true.
How does the scientist, the artist, the human develop personal resilience to that and still want to walk along that journey and still want to put the work out and still want to develop? Is it just getting used to the idea of this will make me better and absorbing that like a mature person? How do people cope with it, do you think?
I think internally there's a this will make it better approach. which is certainly the way you got to do. But then the other thing, which is the reality, is that we all create personas and characters for every area of our life, and maybe you create a persona for that area of your life, which is a little bit more toughened and resilient. In the wee small hours of the night, 3-4 a.m., when you wake up and the horrors are shouting at you, we'll all feel bad about being criticized. Yeah. We always do. We all have imposter syndrome. Well, we should have. If you don't have imposter syndrome, I think you're either very deluded, or you're a couple of packets of duct tape away from being Dennis Nielsen. You know, there's something not right about not having a sense of imposter syndrome. I'm sure
I need to develop imposter syndrome. Write that down. Apparently it's quite a big tell if I don't have it. I'll work it up. Yeah, okay. All right then.
Yeah, well, apparently they have it quite a bit in surgeons, and surgeons create a persona to prevent anyone seeing that. But you know, ultimately at some point that person took a scalpel and made their first cut, and any surgeon who says they were totally happy about it is there's something not right.
So Denise, you're a visual artist. I think of your style as part of what you do has a very intriguing physical style of mark making with pencils, and intricacy, a delicacy, a complexity in some of the pieces you've done in the past. But I'd like to know what your experience of learning with others has been. Specifically, have you been through the tyranny of the crit in your studies and your practice, when you put things on the wall specifically to get attacked, they're there nakedly in front of fellow creatives? Have you been through that process, and what's it been like for you?
The freeing up around having a strength of position, really, and not being interested really in how people move around the work, and how people respond to it, becomes easier to accommodate, but also appreciate. I find I'm curious about people's responses, but it doesn't actually mean that I'll change anything. So, but that comes through exposure to that kind of rigor, I think, as well. So if you've got people that you trust, and you've got a kind of network of people who you respect and whose opinions you value, then that's a great way of feeding practice, and having a kind of response that is a curious one for me.
Yeah, I mean, two significant words there for me are, one, rigor. It is like a boot camp. Two, trust. I think in a way, School of Hard Knocks can be a brutal but swift way to learn, especially if you're younger and you go to art college at a sort of collegey time of life. And the lovely First Lady of Momo has often said to me that she almost wishes she went through an art school type education where you have that rigor of nowhere to hide, put it on the wall, what's everyone going to say? And also the tyranny of tutors going, yes, that's rubbish because we don't like it, but over here, this person's marvellous, let's go to the bar. It is all a way of learning, but when you get older, you get to curate your team a bit more, don't you? And that becomes important, does it, to you, to find that trusted team around you?
So I'd say that the tutors' responses are a bit more subtle than that, really. So that they might say things that hit you in the morning after, so they're which that's quite an interesting phenomena, I suppose. But so it's not necessarily at the time that you'll kind of be beaten into a corner.
It's a slow release. It's like a slow release.
It's like a insidious, kind of drills into you.
It's the porridge of criticism where you get a hit to begin with, and then later on in the day you're still feeling the effects.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, like ready break.
Yes. Yeah. But does it make you glow or go on fire? I don't know what the.
Yeah, let's say it's glow.
But have you found turning points in moments of criticism, by which I mean the crit environment where people are standing around us? Have you had times where you've radically diverted the work because of that, or not? Do you just take it on board and nod and go, yes, I'll ignore you?
I don't think I radically. I guess during the most recent study, I abandoned paths of work because I realised something about it that wasn't because of a negative response, but the response was not what I was interested in pursuing. So I've then moved off into a different kind of form or a different kind of process, really. So it can be a more, subtle kind of resonance to the response, really, I think, as well.
Why science is a bit like art. Hypothesis 3. The calling. The worthy bit isn't the headline published achievement, the expo. It's walking the miles and keeping going and just refusing to damn die when no arse gives a fig and no one is watching, listening, buying, funding or paying any attention whatsoever. And the brief press launch that you're saving your best 50s surfing shirt for is a very dim future possibility. The ancient prophets didn't ask for their burden, but dear Lord, did they live it? As a scientist, you've been in the wee small hours. Something keeps making you face the demons in the demon-haunted world, including your own. What is it about being called to be a scientist, and how do you keep going in the wilderness years? Because so much of it is just keeping plodding when no one's watching and there's no funding, and yeah.
Well, obviously being a science educator, there are different struggles, and every few weeks you're going to wake up and think, how the hell can I cope with this again? But that's the education side of it rather than the science side of it. From what I know from people working in the science profession who do face this, they are terribly disillusioned by things like funding problems. They spend weeks and weeks completing funding requests and then it just gets slapped down. They are constantly trying to justify their very own existence within their lab. They have to keep publishing or else they're getting more trouble. So they start to publish crap things. And they're under an awful lot of pressure. And yes, I imagine all of them must say, there's a simpler life. From my point of view, I would actually earn more money if I was a junior manager in a major supermarket which is of German origin and begins with an L. So I would earn more money doing that. So there's that element of it that you must get disillusioned. But yeah, there are people who stand in valleys and they can see the distant mountains, and that's all well and good, and they love the view of the distant mountains, and they love the little valley, and they settle down the valley, and they build a little place to live and a little world to enjoy. And every now and then they look at the distant mountain and they say, well, that's fun. I like the distant mountain. It's a nice backdrop to my little valley. And then there are those people who say, I want to find what's over that bloody mountain. And I don't care how nice my little valley is, or I don't care how tricky the journey is going to be, but I'm going there someday. And it's the someday. And I imagine for the majority of people who work in the sciences, as for the majority of people who work in the arts, that day will never come fully, because it never does. The mountains keep moving, and there's always another mountain range behind them.
There is.
But I think that it's the movement, it's the trajectory that really matters. I know it's a cliche to say life is the journey, but it's like what we're talking about at the very beginning. It's process. I think there's something. I think there's a line in the Old Testament that says, "Without a vision, the people shall perish."
Yeah, I know it well.
And I think, well, it's like you yourself as a person. Well, your sort of persona may not perish, your job may not perish. You can continue to plug in and do what is necessary and have your glass of wine at home and sort of live your little life and look forward to a holiday in the summer. That's fine. But inside, something vital has died. It's what you would have called a soul, I guess.
Yeah.
And when you eventually decide, I'm never going to see the mountain, I'm just going to sit down,
then you may as well be dead. It's the restlessness. The restlessness is what shows the calling, but shows you're alive.
Yeah. I would absolutely agree with it. There are people who lose their sense of wonder somehow. I think, and it's not their fault. I think it's leached out of you. The world that we live in leeches it bites bit out of you every day. The sort of expectations. Okay, you want to be a scientist. You want to be in the lab finding shit out. And instead, what you're doing is filling in forms and doing
just like artists funding things. Artists have to do that all the time, and it's boring as hell and doesn't always pay off.
Yeah, well, one of the things that's most curious about my particular profession, which is weird, because having clawed my way up whatever the greasy whiteboard marker or whatever it is to win my award. On the way, people notice that you're really good at this teaching, and every single time a management person has said, you're really good at this teaching, they follow it up with saying, would you consider going into management? And every single time I'm like, so I'm really good at this thing, and you want me to go and do this thing I know nothing about?
Yeah,
and the response is, oh, money.
Yeah, but
if I stepped away from the whiteboard, something vital in me would die.
It doesn't nourish the soul not doing the thing itself, does it? And getting into management. But I know that certainly the way I've had to do it in a very unglamorous way, and lots of creatives do, is what I tend to call the hustle of piecing together different things and trying to increase more and more of the percentage of your time closer to the bit of it you love. But if all of it can end up in some way creative, I always felt that was some sort of practical success. For you, or for a scientist as well, that must mean, finding, for some scientists, the teaching bit would give them some regular work if they're doing research, but also, is that a bit of a joy as well, being in the classroom? And I mean, it definitely is for you. That's why you're there, isn't it?
I think the idea of what you're saying about trying to cobble together, this is my day job, it pays the bills. This is the art element. This is what I really want to do. It's my passion. And you hear a lot of that. But you look at the history of science. First of all, you look at the history of science. Most of science was established by the gentleman scientists who didn't have any day work, any day job at all. And they'd be moaning about, I'm going to my study now to do my work. Listen, son, if you didn't go into your study, you're still rich. You still got food. You still got a house. If I don't go into my study, I'm on the streets. So, this is additional pressure. If you move further back, you've got the arts and the patronage. So you've got an artist would have a patron, and the reason they had a patron was to take away all the fear and worry you had that took you away from doing your art.
Yeah, I got to find one of those.
Well, why can't we move to a world where the scientists, the groundbreaking people who are coming up with ideas that revolutionize the lives of all of us, particularly at this time when we need to sort this planet out, why can't we free them?
Yeah.
Why can't we free them? Why can't they have an established income that all of them get, they don't have to fight for, and they know that they've got food and housing and all of that? Why can't we give them more time off so that when they do need rest, they get rest? Why do we have HR departments involved in science? Why can't they just not be there? If you look at the very early origins of human complex society, the evidence seems to be along the lines of when people divided roles, you had those who sort of fought, and they became sort of important because they were the ones with the big bloody axes. You had those who prayed, who were telling you that, we're looking after your eternal soul, give us lots of food. And then there were the artists, and there were the metal workers, and these people who were doing something so special for the rest of society that the rest of society supported them so could get on with it. Yeah, I'm not saying there was an ideal world back then. Of course, it wasn't an ideal world back then. But these days, those who are doing the most important things for us, like trying to find this bloody vaccine, are still living within a system where they have to make sure that they do the laundry and they pay their bills and they get this done and they fill in this performance review and they do all, we've moved backwards. But we've moved backwards. 100 years ago, people were saying, economists were saying 100 years ago, that we'd be working maybe 2 days a week, maybe 12 hours. The rest of the time we could do what humans do best, which is play and sing and tell stories and do art. Now we're working more hours than we ever have.
Yeah. Yeah. Do you, when you're teaching, are you, I think you are, trying to infuse your students with a sense of you can change the world, and your curiosity can lead to, well, the way I'd put it in creative terms is writing new stories of us. It's not simply it's about discovering who we can be in a different system, retooling the system. You are hoping they'll be rebellious, aren't you, in some way? Rebelliously curious?
I'm always on the edge. Recently, I believe we've been instructed by our benighted overlords that we're not allowed to teach anything which is opposing capitalism. So I am sort of thinking,
you gotta laugh, haven't you, eh?
Yeah. I can't teach about the environmental crisis without teaching about capitalism. The two are directly linked. What I try to do in my students, as I tell them, is to try and shake their brains until the wheels start to spin again and they start to think more fluidly instead of all the gunk that has been shoved in to block up their thought patterns, and to focus it on the way that vicious orchestrated campaigns such as marketing have put them into. And I mean that, honestly, I mean that with all my heart. They live in a world which is doing everything it can to get them to become this one thing, which is a profitable beast for them, like a cash cow on steroids. But that's not the world we want to live in, and that's why they're so bloody miserable. I don't try and show them how to do all these things, or try and indoctrinate them about why they can tell a different message, why they can write their own story, or any of that sort of stuff. I'd love to think I do. I think what I do is give them permission to allow themselves to be what they dream of being.
Now, it's often said that artists are sort of called, or just another class of human. You just know that you're an artist. And I've often likened the artist to the prophet, not to be grandiose, but simply that sense of a burden placed on you, an instinct to go and explore, make sense of the world through making in some way. And I am interested in how we demythologize that, show that it's a very ordinary human thing to do, actually, even if not everybody is called to the art. So how do you frame your sense of calling to be an artist, and how did you first hear or answer the call?
Okay, so I think a lot of artists would say when they were small, they used to do some kind. I used to go in the garage with all the sharp woodworking tools and curiosity, really, with processes and materials. The kind of mixture of inquisitiveness about information and language and what's happening in the world, and also mixing that in with skills and technologies, to do with art and design. I think it's like an ongoing unresolved quest to find answers for questions that I've probably made up.
Yes, yes, interesting. But was there a moment where you decided to label yourself an artist, or did you always carry that?
So I've always been working in making things, really, or drawing in some part of my life, but maybe as a professional kind of career, I didn't work as an artist. And there was definitely a moment of, okay, nobody's stopping me. I can put this label on. And I did. I actually kind of metaphorically put a label on and started calling myself an artist, and began professionally working. So by professionally working, I mean financially, kind of. So started earning money in the arts. That was probably the kind of moment I thought, well, yeah, I can wear that label now.
I am that
But
person.
I was always making things.
Sometimes it's just recognition, isn't it? Going, I see myself doing that. And by choosing to put a label, it sort of verifies it, and it feels like you've stepped into it in a new way, embodied it in a new way. I
think it's about definition, isn't it, really? Because, that different people have said different things. So some people would say everyone's an artist, and I agree with that as well, really. But there's no reason why people can't find their own way, because there are no rules, really. There are no... it's a variable definition. It's like a word that can mean many things.
I agree with that. Go on.
And somebody else also said, well, if you're not making work, you're not an artist. Well, that's not true either, is it? So
clearly not. No.
We're always making work in some way, I think.
Well, this is always processing as well, isn't it? This is always turning, so that's always doing something. You don't have to be productive, and again, that's a scientific principle that you've got to go away and think about things, especially if you're doing something quite theoretical. Your brain's just got to ruminate and learn the processes of questioning and letting your brain do stuff in the background, not always being in the conscious bit. I must solve this problem. That will come when it comes, but there are other things you can do to keep the wheels turning in the background.
Yeah, I call it fermenting. Really, so it's kind of setting little kind of triggers off, and then maybe doing something related to them, but actually the work's carrying on while you're going about doing your other things, your chores and your garden clearing and
background tasks. It's still happening, isn't it? You make me think of a challenge I've come across in more recent years. The whole idea of the label of the artist is quite mystifying. And it puts a barrier between those of us who are comfortable with it and those who consider themselves not creative. I think it's part of a fundamental culture thing we've got at the moment. It's a bit broken where art is concerned. So it would be perhaps healthier to say, instead of I'm an artist, say I have an artistic impulse to do this, that and the other. But at the same time, for your own development, there comes a point where you actually do need to dignify yourself and ennoble yourself with a little bit of I am that. Maybe it's an oscillating thing. Sometimes you've got to say I am an artist, and other times say no, that's too pretentious. I validate the work, not me. I don't know. To me it seems like something that keeps evolving.
Yeah, that's another. That validation word really, I think, is full of questions for me as well. Really. So again, that then links to the context in which you're making the work, really, and the same. The scientists would say the same, doesn't it?
You might say that science's place has slipped into a kind of commercial engineering, its progress addicting us to a sort of toxic global robot culture with little curiosity or reason. And you might say that art's place has slipped into a sort of commercial storytelling, its sense-making addicting us to a kind of global entertainment baby formula with little curiosity or reason. I mean, you could, and you would be basing it on some fairly clear first field observations, but in such complex times it would seem a tad reductive to leave it there, like someone's moaning dad who can't keep up anymore. Plus, it would hardly be curious, would it, pushing open the Jurassic Park lab ride safety rail to get under the skin of our rich times and go mess with the raptor eggs. As scientist or artist, we should be finding all the warm data around us just too fascinating to take much at face value. In truth, design is where art meets science. It's as much about theatre as it is problem solving, as much about joy as it is usability. And that may be why it's often said that design will save the world, responding with as much individuality and play as method and analysis. Certainly I think we need them both now more than ever, in an era of crisis unlike any other on the human timeline. We have so very much to lose and so very much to retool, all of it ultimately found in our imaginations. We need to build some new stories of us in the demon-haunted world, as Carl Sagan described it. To keep our nerve and our belief in the human ability to construct magic from raw materials. Science thinking and art thinking have never been more needed to literally make sense out of apparent chaos. After all, now that no one knows what lane they're supposed to be in and everyone seems to drive cars pretending to be off-roaders, is it time we encouraged and equipped more of us to learn how to be true explorers? For do we ever have some serious and wondrous world building to do?
Unsee the Future.